Anyway, so that was the deal. The Bill of Rights were secured. The first Congress passes the Bill of Rights. They go out to the states. They're ratified. Interesting little story. There were actually 12 rights. There were 12 amendments in that package that were sent out by the first Congress. Only 10 of them got ratified as the Bill of Rights. And the story of numbers 11 and 12 is an interesting story. One of them was the Congressional Pay Raise Amendment, and the other one was an apportionment amendment that said no congressional district could be above a certain size. Now, the apportionment amendment was never passed, but the Congressional Pay Raise Amendment is now in our Constitution. It's the 27th Amendment. And the interesting thing about this is how it actually can be. I'm going to tell the story because it's a story worth knowing. It was ratified May 7th, 1992. Now, what it doesn't say here is that it was proposed in 1789 by the first Congress. How did that happen? How did an amendment proposed by the first Congress get ratified in 1792? Well, it happened like this. Today, when an amendment is proposed by Congress, usually they put a 7-year clock on it. They say 3/4 of the states have to ratify within 7 years, and if they don't, it's done. It doesn't become part of the Constitution. Remember the Equal Rights Amendment? How they were the proponents of it were pushing to get those last few states before 7 years, and they failed to do so. Well, that's how most amendments have been throughout the majority of the 20th century and into today. But the framers with the Bill of Rights, the first 12, they didn't put any time limit. And so it got a collection of states, but not enough to get 3/4 at the time in the 1780s, 1790s. And then it just sort of lay dormant for a while. And then in the early years, well, there were a few states that ratified it in the early 1800s. But then in the early 1900s, there was a movement to rein in the powers of Congress. And we should do this fan. Is there a way to it's going so it's nice and cool here? This is mine. Someone grab the plug here while I just keep things cool. So we're going to start getting heated up here when I start. That's good. That's all right. Because some of the stuff's going to make you mad. So, all right. So it goes the pay raise amendment. It gets a few states to ratify in the 19th century. Then in the 1920s, 1930s, some more states ratified, and then it just lays dormant again. Well, in the around 1990, 1991, a student at the University of Texas is looking for a paper to write. And he starts reading about this history of this Congressional Pay Raise Amendment, how it never got ratified. And then he notices that there's no 7-year clock on it. And so he writes a paper for his class at the University of Texas, and in this paper he says, this thing could still be ratified. It's still possible to ratify the Congressional Pay Raise Amendment. And then apparently he knew a member of the Texas legislature, but he sends his paper to the member of the Texas legislature. The member of the Texas legislature says, yeah, we ought to do this. And they propose a ratification resolution to ratify the pay raise amendment, and then Texas actually ratifies it. And then a few other states see what Texas has done. This is right in the early 1990s. Remember how Congress was raising its pay? And that was back when Congress was concerned about budget deficits and concerned about excessive spending. And it was a different time in America. And they said, and Congress said, our members of the state legislature said, this is a great idea. We will force the members of Congress to stop raising their salaries so quickly. And so a whole bunch of states followed Texas's lead. And then in 1992, suddenly, this thing has 38 states. Guess what grade he got on his paper? A C. A C. True story. And so anyway, this student in Texas starts the re-ratification of the 27th Amendment, and it was recognized by the U.S. government. Congress, of course, keen to show all Americans, oh yeah, we don't want to raise our salaries. No, well, this is a great idea. They of course, immediately passed a resolution recognizing that, yes, we believe this is ratified. There could have been some people who tried to challenge and say, well, maybe it expires after 200 years. But nobody made that argument. There's no sell-by date on a constitutional amendment that doesn't have the same 7-year limit on it. And so that's how we got it. But it shows just sort of the amazing nature of our Constitution. Once something is out there, it could be ratified if it doesn't have an expiration date.
So what did the apportionment, what did the other amendment say?
The other amendment said, and I used to have it memorized, and I'm sure it's not in here. The other amendment said that there shall be no district in Congress shall have, except the district, had about like 30-some thousand, 35,000, I think, per
Oh, okay.
citizens. And it said, under no circumstances, if I'm remembering this correctly, shall a district be larger than 50,000. I think 50 was before
We had a
50.
huge Congress in that case.
Yeah, and if that had been in place, we would have a Congress of 6,000 people. Congress of I think 6,000 people works out. It's huge. It'd be like the Russian Politburo or something. In the Soviet Politburo. So anyway, that was the amendment. Yeah.
What was the purpose of the 27th amendment?
The purpose was to stop pay raises from going in during the same Congress. So the way it reads is this: no law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives shall take effect until an election of representatives shall have intervened.
So does that mean that they're trying to stop any legislation during a lame duck session?
No, it means that if this Congress enacts a pay raise, it can't take effect until after the next Congress is seated. So the voters have a chance to vote the bums out if they've given themselves too much of a pay raise. That was the thinking. Anyway, so let's go back to the Constitution. All right, the Constitution the parts that we're going to talk about. Okay, so we get the Bill of Rights. That's part of the deal. Now the Congress. Oh, one more thing about the Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights were different from previous English Bills of Rights. The Magna Carta of 1215, the British Declaration of Rights of the 17th century. These were rights that were acknowledged by the Crown. The Crown decided, okay, we are willing to give the English commoners certain rights, and we will deign to offer these rights because we choose to give them to you. But the Declaration of Independence was so critical, such a salient breach from that, because the Declaration of Independence said that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. That was a revolutionary idea. The idea that the Crown does not create rights, that God creates rights, and that government's job is to protect the natural rights given by God. There's also a reference to natural rights in the opening sentence of the Declaration of Independence.
Yeah, Ellen Keyes put that very distinctly. It's not by our choice, but by His will.
By His will, exactly. We can choose to enumerate some of the rights that God has given us and give them constitutional protection, but God created the rights. Government didn't create the rights. That was a radical idea. That was one of the things that distinguished our Bill of Rights from the Magna Carta and from the English Declaration of Rights. And it was a radical concept. And therefore, if government fails to protect these rights, as the Declaration of Independence says, then we have every right and even duty to remove that government and replace it with one that does protect our God-given rights. That was a radical idea. Yeah.
So where I read someplace where there would not be a constitution if the Bill of Rights hadn't been ratified.
That is correct. The Constitution would not have been ratified unless the Massachusetts Compromise had occurred, because that was the logjam. The Anti-Federalists had pretty much stymied the Constitution. There was a lot of suspicion of this Constitution in the ratification phase, and only when the Anti-Federalists made their case, okay, we'll give it to you if you give us the Bill of Rights, did we get it. Okay, now let's